Let's kick things off right in the thick of it. Picture this. It's Thanksgiving Eve, November 24th, 1971. A man in a sharp dark suit and a black raincoat walks up to an airline counter in Portland, drops cash for a one-way ticket to Seattle under the name Dan Cooper, and literally sets in motion the only unsolved case of air piracy in commercial aviation history. Today, we're going to use actual FBI files and some amazing modern science to break down exactly how this heist of the century actually went down. So, shortly after takeoff, the whole thing begins. Cooper hands a handwritten note to a flight attendant named Florence Schaffner. Now, she thinks he's just a lonely businessman slipping her his phone number, so she just drops it into her purse without even looking at it. But Cooper leans in and whispers, "Miss, you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb." And, here is what really sets that true crime thriller pacing right from the jump. Cooper is chillingly calm. He settles back into seat 18E, the very last row of the plane, orders a bourbon and 7-Up, pays his tab, and then smoothly opens his briefcase just enough to show her these ominous red cylinders and a tangle of wires. Now, this wasn't some drawn-out multi-day hostage negotiation, not at all. It was a rapid, incredibly high-stakes succession of events. At 2:50 p.m., the plane takes off, boom. By 3 p.m., the hijacking is officially underway with that note. The plane ends up circling Seattle for about 2 hours, while authorities frantically scramble on the ground. At 5:46 p.m., they finally land. The ransom and the parachutes are brought aboard, and all the passengers are let go. Fast forward to 7:40 p.m., and the plane is back in the air with nobody but Cooper and the flight crew. Then, at exactly 8:13 p.m., the pilots feel this sudden upward pitch in the tail section. The aft air stair has just been deployed. All right, we need to take a second and really land the impact of what Cooper walked away with, or, jumped away with. $200,000. In 1971, that was an absolute fortune. To put that into perspective, we're talking the equivalent of about $1.6 million today. But honestly, it's not just the sheer amount, it's the intense logistics behind it. See, Cooper specifically demanded that the ransom be paid entirely in unmarked $20 bills. So the FBI had to literally scramble to gather 10,000 individual $20 bills, which ended up weighing nearly 20 pounds. And get this, every single one of those bills was photographed on microfilm by the FBI before they handed it over in a heavy canvas bag. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is what his flight demands reveal about his actual identity. He demanded a 10,000-foot maximum altitude, a 100-knot minimum airspeed, 15-degree wing flaps. He wanted the landing gear left down, and, crucially, the aft air stair lowered in mid-air. Cooper deliberately chose the Boeing 727 because it was uniquely capable of flying low and slow without just stalling out and crashing. Plus, he knew a highly guarded industry secret. The 727 had a rear staircase that could be lowered during flight, and, this is key, the pilots couldn't override it from the cockpit. So right away, the FBI knew they were dealing with someone who possessed deep, incredibly specific aviation knowledge. Yet, despite the absolute terror of the situation, the hijacker's personality was jarringly polite. Tina Mucklow, the flight attendant who was forced to sit next to him for hours, she noted his remarkably cool demeanor. Quote, "He was not nervous. He seemed rather nice, and he was not cruel or nasty. He wasn't frantic. He even offered her a cigarette at one point. When he paid for his bourbon, he literally tried to let the crew keep the change as a tip." It is just this bizarre juxtaposition, right? A man committing a massive federal crime while displaying the everyday manners of a typical commuter. So, how does the getaway actually happen? It was incredibly calculated. Once they're back in the air and heading south, Cooper orders Tina Mucklow into the cockpit and tells the whole crew to stay put. As she turns back, she sees him tightly tying this heavy 20-pound bag of money right around his waist. At this point, he is completely alone in the cabin. He manages to lower the heavy metal stairs against the rushing wind, steps out onto the platform, and simply parachutes into the freezing, pitch-black night, plunging somewhere over the dense, incredibly rugged wilderness of Washington state. Which leads us to the aftermath, and a truly staggering number, 66. When Cooper vanished into the night sky, it sparked a massive FBI hunt that would remain completely active for 45 years. I mean, we're talking military helicopters, SR-71 Blackbird spy planes, submarines literally searching lake bottoms, and thousands upon thousands of interviews. It ultimately resulted in a 66-volume case file. The sheer scale of this investigation is just mind-boggling. And yet, for all of that incredible effort, the FBI officially suspended the active investigation in 2016 without a definitive answer. So what did all those agents actually find on the plane? Let's break down the bizarrely sparse physical evidence left behind on seat 18E. We've got 8 Raleigh filter-tipped cigarette butts, a couple of the parachutes he didn't use, one of which actually had its cords put, presumably so he could tie the money bag to himself, a single, solitary strand of brown hair. But the absolutely most important piece of evidence, the one that would literally break the case wide open decades later, is the tie. A black JCPenney clip-on tie, discontinued in 1968, just left resting right there on his seat. Keep that visual in mind because it is absolutely crucial. For decades, the biggest debate has been whether he even survived the jump at all. On one hand, the arguments against it are pretty strong. He jumped into the pitch black, in the freezing rain, with a 15-degree Fahrenheit wind chill, wearing a business suit, a trench coat, and slip-on loafers. Not exactly survival gear, right? But, on the other hand, the FBI actually profiled him as having potential military paratrooper training. Furthermore, in the year following this heist, 3 separate copycat hijackers, guys like Martin McNally, did the exact same thing out of 727s, in similar, terrible conditions. And guess what? All of them survived the landing. So what do you think? Could Cooper have actually walked away from that? Well, the world got its first real clue in 1980, 9 long years after the jump. An 8-year-old boy named Brian Ingram was vacationing with his family, just digging a little fire pit in the sand on the banks of the Columbia River at a place called Tennebar. Suddenly, his rake hit something buried in the sand. It was $5,800 in disintegrating $20 bills, still bundled up in their original rubber bands. The FBI quickly confirmed that the serial numbers matched the ransom money. This completely renewed public interest, but it also raised a massive geographical mystery. So, how did that money get to a beach miles away from the suspected jump zone? One theory is the washable washdown. This suggests the money landed in a tributary river, washed downstream over the years, and eventually deposited naturally on the bank. But let's contrast that with some modern flight path analysis. A group called Citizen Sleuths analyzed the actual radar and flight data from that night and proved that Flight 305 never actually flew over Tennebar. The data strongly suggests the plane was miles east on a completely specific vector. So if he didn't jump over the river, how on earth did the money get buried there? With the rest of the money missing and only a vague physical description to go on, the mystery naturally evolved into a massive whodunit. Over the decades, the FBI investigated over 1,000 serious suspects. I mean, they looked at everybody. They range from thrill-seeking Special Forces commandos to disgruntled electronics supervisors, and even guys making dramatic deathbed confessions. Let's take a look at the top suspect profiles that have totally fascinated researchers over the years. Was it Ted Breeden, a highly trained Special Forces commando and master skydiver who suddenly went rogue? Or maybe Joe Lockitch. He was an electronics supervisor whose daughter had recently been killed in an FBI hostage standoff, which, gives him the perfect revenge motive. Could it have been an airline insider like Northwest Orient's purser Kenneth Christensen? Or was it Richard McCoy, the copycat who successfully hijacked a plane in the exact same manner just a few months later? You really have to ask yourself, was Cooper a highly trained military operative or just a clever civilian with a massive axe to grind? For a long time, the case seemed totally cold. That is, until a stunning breakthrough in 2013. Remember that abandoned JCPenney clip-on tie? Well, an independent research team finally gained access to it and used modern electron microscopy to really analyze the fabric. And they didn't just find everyday dust. No, they found over 100,000 microscopic particles embedded in the tie, including extremely rare aerospace metals, unalloyed titanium, bismuth, and antimony. This definitely wasn't something you'd just pick up walking down the street in 1971. To really understand how those particles got there, we need a quick definition of cold rolling. It's a highly specialized manufacturing process where a sheet of metal is thinned out between 2 rollers at extreme pressure to enhance its strength. Investigator Eric Ulis realized that the titanium particle found on Cooper's tie was literally smeared into 400 series stainless steel. And the only way that happens is through the immense, crushing pressure of a cold rolling facility. Now here is the incredible mini aha moment. In the late 1960s and early 70s, cold rolling titanium was extremely rare. You just didn't find it anywhere. Ulis traced this specific process back to a special metals facility in Pittsburgh called Crucible Steel. And get this, they were a major supplier to Boeing, the very company that built the 727 Cooper hijacked, and they held the actual patents for the specific kind of titanium identified on his tie.
This single discovery drastically narrowed the suspect pool from thousands of random men down to one specific niche industry.
And that leads us to the newest and arguably most compelling suspect matching this physical evidence, Vince Peterson. Peterson was an engineer at Crucible Steel. He literally wrote academic papers on titanium and the effects of salt on it. And by the way, traces of commercial salt were also found on the tie. He was one of only 8 engineers at the plant during that era, and importantly, he wore a tie to work every single day. Compare that to D.B. Cooper, a man who used specific aviation jargon, knew Boeing aircraft intimately, and left behind a tie covered in those exact, rare manufacturing particles.
But even with these incredible modern breakthroughs, there are still massive loose ends. Over $194,000 in $20 bills has simply never been found. One of the reserve parachutes, specifically a dummy training chute, vanished with him. And crucially, modern investigators are currently fighting the FBI in court right now to get access to an unexamined adjustable tie clasp hidden inside the knot of that clip-on tie. If Cooper adjusted that tie with his bare hands, his DNA could be permanently trapped in the tiny grooves of that clasp.
So we end up right back where we started, looking out the open door of a Boeing 727 into the freezing night. What is your conclusion? Did D.B. Cooper plunge to his death in the rugged Washington wilderness, his grand plan ending in tragedy? Or did he somehow survive the elements, outsmart the largest FBI manhunt in history, and pull off the perfect crime, simply walking away into the shadows? The evidence gives us some thrilling clues, but the final chapter remains unwritten. Thanks for diving into this fascinating explainer with me.